I always wondered about this when I was a young kid too, because when I was young, I was very observant and I seen people on the streets, homeless people, and there was always people of the same race. They're the same as me. They're native, and I always wondered why there were so many natives on the street like that.
Is there anything you want to say about the PRC?
Oh, I don't know about too much right now because it's just beginning, eh? So, well, after the first couple of weeks, I'll get a better understanding of it, eh? But as it seems to be today, the whatever it is they're talking about right now is pretty fucked up.
If you don't mind me asking, have you been to residential schools?
Yes, I am.
Intergenerational, the passing on to the next generation. Intergenerational survival, the passing on of how to survive the trauma imposed upon our people. This is the indigenous knowledge of love and compassion. We must be reminded of the power of love and compassion. It has helped us to survive, and for some of us, maybe even thrive. We are still here. We were not intended to even be here. We have in fact survived the largest act of genocide the world has ever known. That's 97% depletion of original populations. Praying in our languages and using our medicines today, even though they were outlawed and punishable for 100 years. An international recognition that a crime against humanity has occurred here. A crime has been committed, an apology made, payouts have been distributed in an alleged attempt to reconcile for the crimes. But we ask, who is the criminal? Has a criminal been named? Has the criminal been judged? Intergenerational trauma. Yes, we know it. It's in our blood. The memories of trauma run through our veins. Many of our people refer this to as blood memory or soul wound. The Indian residential schools, the 60s scoop. This indeed is a systematic dispossession of the human right to transfer love and happiness. The low fluency of our indigenous languages is not our fault. It's not a loss. It has been a systemic dispossession. We live it, our parents lived it, their parents, and we pray and hope our children don't. There can't be any reconciliation until there is truth. Truth is, 1 in 5 mainstream Canadians receive university degrees. 1 in 5. While only 1 in about 33 to perhaps even upwards to 40 Aboriginal people receive university degrees. 9 in 10 Aboriginal men have been incarcerated at least one time in their life. Aboriginal people are more likely to go to prison than university. More likely to be homeless, the most likely to be homeless in our own homeland. The least likely to be homeowners in our own mother country. Aboriginal women are more impoverished than any other group, and by 5 to 7 times are more likely to die violent deaths. Truth, these are the truths. Truth is, we are so very much more than the oppression in the statistics. Alberta experienced the heaviest population of residential school students. We also experience today the highest unemployment rates of Aboriginal people than any other province. The TRC process has engaged with survivor stories, and for many, it has been healing for them and their families. and for others, it has had a devastating impact.
Somebody in the room today talked about a Holocaust, and what happened to Aboriginal people in Canada meets the definition of any Holocaust I have ever heard of or written about, but it is a silent Holocaust that is never discussed, and only now are we learning more and more about it.
This part of Canadian history has largely been forgotten, repressed, shoved under the covers, hidden. It's just starting to come out now. And I remember when the apology was read in 2008, I called my mother from Ottawa because I was at the reading. And I said, "So Mom, what do you think?" And she said, "Well, now they'll believe us and that we weren't making up stories."
You will never feel fulfilled unless you have those questions answered. So we really have to know the truth about the past, and that's something that's been hidden for a long time. As well, we have our society that we live among, that we have relationships with. We have to know what their history is as well. So in the city of Edmonton, where we're going to have this national event, it's important for the environment that we live in, the society that we live in, to be educated and informed and understand the truth about our past. So once they do, then we can reconcile. Then we can build healthy relationships, and then with those healthy relationships, we can move forward, and we can deal with the effects of residential school and all the other traumas that we've dealt with.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay.
You ready?
Go now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Did you just want to say your name and spell it?
Sure, it's Ian Mosbey, IAN MOSBY.
Awesome. All right, so first question. What made you want to research what happened medically at the residential schools?
Well, it was actually by accident that I discovered these experiments. I was doing research on the history of food and nutrition in Canada during the 1930s and 1940s, and I was interested in residential schools as part of that. But I started to come across documents that suggested that something else was going on that didn't seem right, that seemed sort of tweaked my interest as a historian of nutrition. And so I kept digging. Every time I went back to the archives, I ordered more documents, and eventually this story started to emerge of these nutrition experiments being conducted in 6 residential schools.
Many of our families have stories about starvation, going hungry. We also have stories in our families about strange needles and pills and charts with check marks. And it's the work of Dr. Ian Mosbey that validated and legitimized a lot of the stories in our families.
The question then is, how do we understand the historical legacy of these experiments? For survivors, these revelations simply confirm that what they had long believed about their experiences. As residential school survivor Leonard Poulos told the Toronto Star, he was alarmed by the revelations that he'd been part of a nutrition experiment, but not surprised. Quote, "They never treated us as human beings. Even to this day, I'm 67 and I'm still haunted by it." The sentiment was echoed over and over again by other survivors of these experiments from around the country who, like Bernard Knockwood, Marie Doyle, and Benson Nukamus, made it clear to reporters that their experience of residential school is one of constant hunger in the face of inadequate and often inedible food. And these accounts, which are common among survivors across the country, carry an important message that has never really been acknowledged in an official sense. The nutrition experiments were only possible because malnutrition was already systemic in residential schools across the country. And poor feeding and malnutrition did not end when the experiments ended, but seem to have continued well into the 1960s and 1970s. The question then becomes not just what were the health impacts of these nutrition experiments themselves, but what are the health and psychological impacts of multiple generations of children being malnourished during their formative years? Another unanswered question remains as well. Were these the only experiments? Many survivors I've spoken to told me that the revelations this past summer only confirmed their suspicions that they'd been the subject of medical experiments in their local communities, in residential schools, in TB sanatoria, and in Indian hospitals. Hopefully, as my research has suggested, the assumptions that made these nutrition experiments possible, both within the scientific community and the federal government, remained in place well after these scientific experiments ended. Perhaps it's therefore time that the government took the concerns of survivors seriously and began to release records, not just of what happened in residential schools, but also in other federally operated institutions like Indian hospitals and TB sanatoria. I think most Canadians think that there was some abuse done by sort of bad apple priests. And this article shows that the abuse is systemic. Children were malnourished across the country for generations. The effect on communities, on the health of individuals and on communities is difficult to fathom. And so Canadians need to understand that, and I don't think they do.